I Googled how to write a book. That's how naive I was. And I thought, that works. Write it about Lee,
Right.
never about my family, because I'm just so private. And we had all these secrets we didn't want the world to know. And then when I started realizing all these wonderful writers in my classes and in my writing group, and they were sharing their deepest pains and their deepest, secrets. And I was like, this is a story about Lee and I and who she was in my family before we knew what happened to her. And then my discovery of her truth and what really happened to her. And so it's a double win. Like the reader gets like a double, satisfaction of two different families, two different secrets, and all interwaved, like braided together with a thread that just, comes through the whole story of love, resilience, survival.
Welcome to the Persistence U podcast with Lisbeth. That's you as in university, but we're really much more of a community here. Your host is Lisbeth Meredith. She's an author, speaker, and online teacher. Each week, she'll be delivering amazing stories from survivors and thrivers, all threaded together with a dose of persistence. We're so glad you're listening.
How is your week? It is January 27th as I record this particular part of the interview. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode as much as I did. Dr. Nancy Laughlin is amazing, and I was especially envious as a writer who feels like the process is very lonely sometimes, that she had engaged so many of her students to be enthusiastic about writing about the Night Marauder. So I hope you loved it. This week, we are definitely excited also to have an author thinking about the women in our lives. And often when there are celebrations of things such as Women's History Month, all of the different ways that we honor special women, we're often looking for those high-achieving women. The very first person who ever published a book? Is it the very first woman who ever fill in the blank? It is always someone who did the amazing, but so often the amazing women in our lives truly are the people who help raise us, who stand by us in a crisis, who model fabulous behaviors and support us during difficult times. And that is exactly what Sandra Schnakenburg's book is about, The Housekeeper's Secret. I know that you are going to enjoy this as much as I did. And just so you know, next week we also have a special guest. So we'll talk about that toward the end of this episode. Do enjoy. Thanks as ever for being here. I absolutely love that I've been getting more and more feedback about the podcast and people asking, text me an, episode, or, if I'm not on social media, can you possibly reach out to me on your email list? I do that. So don't forget. I only do it once a month though. So lameredith.com. You can sign up for my email list and find out what's going on with the podcast, with my writing, all of that. I should say Tilka Faces the Odds, One Man at a Time is, of course, out by now. Lesson learned for me. I was ahead of schedule when I was recording my audiobook, which I love doing in a studio. However, we ran into some last minute glitches that held things up. And I myself did not calculate how much time it takes for the distributors to get a hold of the book once it's been approved. The good news is all those glitches are taken care of. The book has been approved for distribution. And just now, at the end of your February, it is in retailers. If you don't see it in ACX or in Audible, rather, through Amazon, there are so many other ways that it is distributed wide. But it will be there. It just takes longer than I predicted. So that was my mistake. Lesson learned. I refuse to let it get me down too much, because the whole process of writing a book and then narrating an audiobook isn't that easy for me. And I enjoy parts of it, and there are other parts that are so above my pay grade. But did it. Yay. I want to celebrate the efforts, not always the outcome, but in this, I think I can celebrate both. Thanks so much. See you at the end of the episode. Sandra Schnakenburg, thank you so much for being on Persistence You. It has been a joy already to meet you, and I'm so interested and invested in hearing how you came to write The Housekeeper's Secret, a memoir. So please tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I want to hear the moment you realized you had to write this memoir.
Well, our housekeeper, Lee Mottoyer, she asked me on her deathbed to write her book, a book that she had always said, I have a story and no one's ever going to believe it. And I actually was like, Lee, what's the story? Is this a threat or a promise? And we'd laugh, And then, before we know it, it came down with cancer. And then she's like, one of my biggest regrets, Sandy, is I never got to write the book. But will you do it for me? Well, it was a difficult time at that moment. I was like, I live in Australia. I was getting ready to get pregnant. We were almost there. And I didn't know her story. And I said, Lee, I don't know your story. She goes, you'll figure it out.
Wow.
You left it like that. And I left it after she passed, shortly after. And about 15 years later, I found Lee's ashes in my mom's house. And we were cleaning out the house after my mom died. And I said, okay, I guess with these ashes, we should reunite her with this husband and son she said she had. It was this story she created, and put her ashes with them at their burial. We knew they were Catholic and they weren't cremated. So I searched for the husband, for marital records, vital records, all the records I could possibly go down these avenues. Crazy time. Like 2 years in, I was exhausted, found nothing. Not even that she was married, but she had these 2 pictures on her mirror in her bedroom. All 30 years she was with us. And I would just gaze at them. Yeah. And just go, what are their names? And she said, oh, stop asking me. Before we even got to anything, she would just push me back and say, enough already. Let's get your chores done or do your homework or whatever. So it was a fine line with her. She didn't want us to go there. And one day my mom came up to me and she goes, Lee said she would leave if you keep pushing and prying. And I'm like, oh, I'll never ask her again. So concerned. I'm like, why would she want to talk about him? Mom just said, well, it's a sad time. She lost her family. It's not something you should talk about. Well, years went on and I still had like pressing curiosity. I had a car accident and nearly died. I had a traumatic brain injury, and Lee helped me. And miraculously, she knew everything to do about a brain injury and all of my issues that were coming up. She was dealing with them like a doctor would. Like she knew exactly what to do, the focus. And it was also like, the Karate Kid where like, focus right, left when he cleaned and it really focused him. We did a lot of that. We did a lot of cleaning faucets and chandeliers. And she would come back to me and say, no, redo it again. Because she knew my focus was ADHD to the max. But anyway, long story short, years later, when I actually, gave up on finding her family, I met a lady in the dog park that I was just devastated that day. And I knew her. I already had known her from our little doggy group, but I didn't know what she did. I didn't know anything about her. But she was like, what's wrong with you today, Sandy? You just look so distressed. And I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to find our housekeeper's family. And this has been going on for 2 years. And I'm so tired of it. I've left the corporate world to do this. And she goes, give me what you have and I'll help you find them. But don't ask me how I find them. She had this connection to something. I think her husband, maybe CIA, something wild. So yes, it was by that evening I got an email. She goes, does this family look familiar? And I knew and there was a Hazel in there and she was a second born. And I said, she had a sister named Hazel. I go, I know that's her family. But the difference, the weird thing about it is that she was the youngest of 5. She always said we're both the 5th child. So we have a lot in common there. But the name for her was not her name. Her birthday was not the birthday we've been celebrating for 30 years.
Oh, wow.
I know. And it didn't show that she had any children or that she was ever married. And I was like, that is so odd that it's like everything about her, but it was her. The first name was a little different. It was like we called her Lee. She said her name was Lee from birth, but it wasn't. It was a different name. And so once we kind of like figured it all out and we ended up digging in more with this CIA lady, so we ended up finding like her family members and numbers. And that's when the story unfolded. So really the inciting incident to the story is finding her ashes in my mom's closet, which was sprung this investigative journey. And ultimately, I ended up uncovering the most horrific thing that I ever would imagine to this person who was like a second mother to me, a counselor, a healer, a person in our family that was just like the hero to all of our pain. And there she was, had gone through a horrific experience herself, but she brought all that wisdom and all that, everything that allowed her to survive to our home. And she helped us in our trauma. And we had verbal abuse. We had a lot of dysfunction going on, even though on the outside, we were a wealthy family living on 44 acres. On the inside, we were broken and crumbling out. And Lee was the only observer and the only person helping my mom and all of us kids.
Wow.
Yeah.
Kind of like an angel in your family.
It was a very divine appointment. It felt like that. Yeah.
An angel with some secrets.
Yeah. So she liked our property. She liked our family, because I can't tell you any spoilers, but I can tell you this. She was hiding out and she didn't want to be found. And she felt after she didn't really commit to our family for 3 years. She kept going for 2 weeks. She kept going back to the city and staying what she called an apartment. And my mom never really asked her, because why were you paying for an apartment? And because I want a place to go. But after about almost 3 years came about, and the crime was increasing in Chicago, and my mom, we were all attached to her. At that point, we were like, Lee can never leave. Why don't, So mom called the agency. She wanted to know where she was staying. She called the number on her application, and the homeless shelter answered. And so she would go back and stay at the homeless shelter on the weekends.
Oh.
My mom didn't tell her. She called. She went to my dad, and I, of course, overheard the whole conversation. And she said, do you mind if we ask her to stay permanently? And Lee didn't accept right away, but she finally did. And when she did, she ended up becoming a part of our fabric of the family. And she was involved with every different conversation. And sometimes we used to say, when she'd say she'd write a book, we thought she would write a book about all this crazy drama that my father was so eccentric and how the things that happened in our house. But And some of my family members thought that because we knew nothing of her story, but yet she wanted to write her story. So I believe this story, The Housekeeper's Secret, is the story she wanted me to write.
I really love that. So few people finish the project of writing a book, and it's much harder than it might seem. So to write someone else's story, to do the research, and at what point did you realize you couldn't really write her story? You needed to write your story and write about her story through your lens.
Yes. And well, first I knew I was going to write a memoir. And a memoir is the author's journey of uncovering my truth and uncovering the housekeeper's truth. So I had like a 2-tier story, 2 timelines, 2 protagonists. I had a complicated story. Every memoir said, this is complicated. It's your first story. And here we are. To be honest, I was very naive before like I even studied memoir or studied writing. I Googled how to write a book. That's how naive I was. And I thought, that works. Write it about Lee,
Right.
never about my family, because I'm just so private. And we had all these secrets. We didn't want the world to know. And then when I started realizing all these wonderful writers in my classes and in my writing group, and they were sharing their deepest pains and their deepest, secrets. And I was like, this is a story about Lee and I and who she was in my family before we knew what happened to her. And then my discovery of her truth and what really happened to her. And so it's a double win. Like the reader gets like a double, satisfaction of two different families, two different secrets, and an all interwaved, like braided together with a thread that just, comes through the whole story of love, resilience, survival. But in general, just writing the story, I would say I didn't feel like qualified to do it. And I didn't have the money to have a ghostwriter. And I also knew a ghostwriter would never know how to write my story. And you can't really have a ghostwriter, really. I mean, some people do, but they have a lot of money. And then I realized this was Lee's gift to me to heal some of my past. So as she asked me to write her story, and of course, I would have never just written my story without her story. I would never thought of writing a memoir about my family, right, because it just wasn't, to me, I just was too, like, it exposed us for just the reason of that. Where this, I was really trying to fulfill a promise to Lee when I was realizing I should start the story when Lee arrived at our doorstep when I was 3.5, and put her in our family and all that she saw and went through with us. So take the reader on a ride that I went on. And then they can go on the ride when I find out the truth too.
Oh, that is so exciting. I mean, it's not an easy thing. How long did you think it would take you to write it versus how long did it take you to finish the draft that you are most comfortable with?
Well, that's such a good question, because that question is like the question of the day, right?
It's hard. It takes me forever. I'm a slow writer.
Oh, I am a slow writer too. And I also realized that you can have a goal. I had many goals, like 10 years ago it was going to be done, but I felt that that I started to get real spiritual about the process too. Like the book is going to come out exactly in the right time, that the world needs it, that kind of thing. Okay. The messaging in the book, trust the timing, trust the process. So I started to really get, like okay with everything that was delayed. And I had an agent, he pitched it to the big 5. It didn't make it. Then I knew, well, maybe the story's not at the level it should be at. I think it needs to be better. So she writes, press picked it up and she goes, I'll take it just the way it is. And I said, no, I would need to find an editor. So she gave me one of her editors and she said, everything's fine. I have no change, maybe like 1 or 2 changes. And it was expensive. And I'm like, well, it's still not the story. It's still not right. I'm going to study. I'm going to keep writing it over again. And then finally I went out to the San Francisco Writing Conference and I interviewed like 20 editors that are really, really like in sort of like a room with all editors and agents. And it's like speed dating where you get like 20 minutes a person and they blow a whistle and you have to switch.
And brilliant, by the way.
Brilliant. It was brilliant. So I connected with one person there, one of my 20-minute sessions. Oh my God, we connected. She got what I was talking about. She got what she had this incredible personality and I knew she was the one. We talked, for a long time after that. And then we decided, okay, we went through, she writes for a couple of the edits. And then I said, Brooke, can we just go direct? And I'll just, work with her direct and then we'll give you the manuscript when we're ready. Because she really gut punched me. I mean, I had a lot of analysis and I had a lot of rabbit holes I went down, backstory.
Okay.
The book now is a riveting tale of page turner and it doesn't lose the reader in some of those rabbit holes. And the way she used all my writing, I had written like 3,000, pages, and it's 300 pages is the book. And I didn't give her 3,000 pages, but I had, rewritten so many different things. So I think in the end, I had worked through all my issues. I'd healed. I really owned it. I was really ready for the world to have it. Where if you asked me like 5 years ago or 7 years ago, if I was ready for the world to know my business, I'd be absolutely not. But now it's like so right. It just feels so good that people call me and text me and email me, strangers all over the country and world. And they're like, wow, I've been so affected by this story. I can't get it out of my head.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I love when you decided that you would take a more spiritual route instead of trying to control all of it, and I personally, when I was writing my first book, had an age in mind that I had to be younger than. So I came out and a certain way it had to be published and all those things. And you know what? None of that matters.
I know.
When you wrote the book the final time and you knew in your heart when it was finished, that's what's important. And clearly it's resonating with people who are reaching out to you and saying, this gets me. This
And even
touches me.
even to the day of launch day, I didn't know how the world was going to receive it. It was scary. I mean, I was like, that was one of a fear. That was a hurdle. But and even when so far it's won 2 awards, like a gold award for nonfiction for authors, and then the Firebird Award for best memoir 2024. And I was
exciting.
I know, I didn't know it was at that level. And I'm really so grateful because the book involves so many issues and so much dynamic writing and movement. And it fits in a lot of story within 300 pages. It's not just one story, it's 2 stories.
Right.
There's a lot of other stories within those stories too. They're all connected. So
that's very exciting. And the neat thing is when you publish your book, when you've written from your heart and it takes a team. I mean, I think a lot of times people will say, well, I can't do it. It's so hard. It is. That's why we have a team. We have to work with people and take classes and, hire an editor and all of those things. But when you finally got the story that you want to share, it helps other people share their own. And that's what's exciting is it's no longer your story and it's no longer the housekeeper's secret. It's really theirs, depending on whatever lens they're reading it through.
And one of the questions you asked earlier, and I don't know if I completely answered, but when I was discovering Lee's truth, she was gone already. And so I couldn't interview her anymore, right? And so there was a lot of things I couldn't say about what happened to her other than what happened to her. The fact of what happened to her. And I think that's important to know in a memoir when somebody is passed away. And if they have writings, great. But there were so many questions I had for her. But at the same time, the story was the story. And it was enough for the book. Yeah.
That is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever get a feeling that she would definitely approve?
Oh, absolutely. I've quit a few times and I would be like sleeping and literally haunted by spirits, like her and Mom trying to keep me up. And I'd be pacing the bedroom. My husband would go, just finish the darn book. No, it's Lee. She's giving you a hard time. And I actually felt like it was. I felt like, it's easier to quit than it is to finish. But because there was another hurdle and another hurdle, and I kept running into walls, but each wall, when the time was right, crumbled down, and somebody or something, and I would get spiritual about it, like bring somebody into my path that can get me over this situation, and it always kind of unfolded, or a book came into my presence. Somebody recommended something to me that was exactly what I need to hear.
That is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
That is absolutely beautiful. So how exciting. The book has only been out a short period of time, but already you've got a couple of awards and online customer reviews. You have it in audiobook format, correct? As well as paperback and ebook.
Yes.
So fantastic. What do you think is next for you?
Well, I think I'm really kind of baiting in the reception of the book right now, and then trying to get more publicity for it. And then after that, say everything settles down. What I really hope for the book is that somebody would, pick it up as a screenplay.
Sure.
It would make a great movie, and everyone's read it, and they're writing reviews, and they're like, they see it on screen. It's like a good Netflix, kind of Reese Witherspoon type of thing. There's so many issues in the story, and there's so many ways to portray these extreme characters. It would make just fascinating. But aside from this story, I do have another book I want to write. It's going to be even like a harder one, but it's also, I'm just still thinking about its redemption process. So I think I like true stories. I like working through pain, which does show a lot in the first book. And I also like connecting with human nature, human spirit. And a lot of people who have read the current book has come up to me and said, wow, our family went through similar things, or I read your book and I never was able to talk about this, but I'd like to talk to you about it. It opened up a lot of hearts because I opened up so much about what things I've been through. And I think that's what it takes. It just takes, it's like, it finally you get to a point in life, it's not like you don't care what people think, but you do what you feel is the best to evolve your soul, and help others.
And you're making a good contribution.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
I do feel like how we connect as humans, how we include people, how we impact things that were challenging is through story. So what a great job. Great job. Where can people learn more about you and your work and find the different places where they can buy your book in any format?
Mm-hmm. Well, my book is available. Simon & Schuster's the distributor. So it's available where all books are sold. Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Goodreads, everywhere, just Target. And you can find me at sandraschnakenburg.com. My name is long. It's SCHNAKENBURG. That's sandraschnakenburg.com. And I'm on Facebook, Instagram.
The Housekeeper's Secret. If people struggle a moment to get the spelling of your last name, The Housekeeper's Secret, a memoir. And we'll have your go-to on show notes as well. And I just cannot thank you enough for being here today. This is just exciting.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much for having me. And I loved your book.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I can't wait to get yours this Thursday. Thank you so much for listening. Was she not amazing? That is an incredible story. I listened to the entire audiobook after she and I recorded together, and it is fantastic. You don't know necessarily where the story is going. It's well written and very inspiring. So sometimes it is a good idea for us to really take stock of who is it in our lives that showed up when we were younger that we may have overlooked. And if it's not too late, and even if it is too late, as the author in this case found, it's really never too late. She wrote a book to honor the memory of the housekeeper and the housekeeper's secret. So it's just a wonderful thing to be able to think about those that have meant so much to us. Next week, we will have Dominice Clifton. After losing everything, she became what is called a clarity coach. And she has a very wonderful, and I shouldn't say next week, it's 2 weeks from now, those whose memory we hold dear. And next week, we will have Dominice Clifton, or rather next episode, we will have Dominice Clifton. I will also have probably a bonus episode. I have so many in the queue now. But Dominice is a woman who tried very hard for a while, like throwing spaghetti at the wall to get a business idea going and to change her financial future. And it was not at all easy. She does not pretend that it was. But eventually, after trying and figuring out who she was and what her purpose was, she became what's called a clarity coach. And she's going to talk to us about that. I think you're going to very much enjoy Dominice's interview. And so, yes, and we will also very likely have a surprise bonus episode. Don't forget to follow the podcast and sign up for my email, lameredith.com. And you can find out what's going on in the writing world and all of that. Thanks so much for being here. Have a fabulous week.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's show. Thank you so much for listening. Now, to find out more, head on over to lameredith.com and be sure to hop on the mailing list too. If you've enjoyed this show, please leave a rating and review or share with a friend. And if you really, really liked it, go ahead and subscribe so that you never miss another episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Persistence U with Lisbeth.